All right, I think we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. I know we're about a minute ahead of schedule, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started today. My name is Cody Smith, and I'm a policy associate at the Center for Rural Affairs. I'm based in our Central Iowa office, and I manage our Iowa State policy portfolio as it relates to water quality, watershed management, and renewable energy, so wind, solar, transmission, and the like. Thanks again for tuning in today. This is our latest episode of our Rural Rapport series, hosted every Tuesday at noon here at the Center for Rural Affairs, and we stream live on Facebook as we are now. A little bit of history I feel is obligatory to dive into about the Center for Rural Affairs and why we work on the issues that we do before we get started today. For those of you who may be tuning in for the first time, the Center for Rural Affairs was established in 1973 in rural Northeast Nebraska, and our home office actually remains in rural Northeast Nebraska, a small town called Lyons, Nebraska. And as I mentioned, I'm in Central Iowa in our Nevada, Iowa office. And we continue to work on a daily basis to build more vibrant rural communities across the region. So we'll continue to do that work. And as part of that, we are active in a number of state legislatures, including here in the Iowa State Legislature, which is why I have a job here at the center. It's to represent rural communities, farmers, small businesses, and others in rural Iowa at the State House in Des Moines. This year, we are primarily pursuing topics or policy related to two topics. Those topics include watershed management and renewable energy. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about our priorities at the legislature as we've formed them in conjunction with rural Iowans across the state to help improve the lives of rural Iowans. The first thing I wanted to talk about today before we jumped in was just sort of a preview of the Iowa legislative session here in 2021, the second session we've had to deal with COVID. There are special COVID protocols and they differ by whatever chamber you're talking about. So for example, a subcommittee level hearing is the most easily accessible way for a member of the public, for members of a lobbyist firm or organizations like the Center for Rural Affairs to engage on a piece of legislation. And the Senate side, the Iowa Senate side, you can give virtual testimony, share your comments there. You can submit written comments directly through a portal online or email them to senators. And then on the House side, unfortunately, they don't have an option for virtual testimony via Zoom or WebEx, regardless of platform, they don't have that option. You can go in person for both of these as well if you'd like to. And the other option you have is submitting written comments. So that will be important moving forward today as well. We're trying to reach out directly to legislators to submit written comments, and we have representation down at the Capitol too, so we can make sure that we're having a meaningful voice in these conversations. So that's just a little bit about the session. It began on January 11th this year. I believe that the target date, as far as the session timetable, as it's called, which is just the annual calendar released by the legislature, says that by April 30th, they're hoping to wrap up. We've heard some talk about maybe wrapping up a little bit early because of COVID and because of redistricting coming up and the census data at the federal level being delayed. They might have to come back for a special session later in the year. So we'll figure out what's going on with the schedule and we'll keep you all updated. So now into the topics that we're most concerned about and most eager to make a change on at the Iowa legislature. Let's start with watershed management. The reason I'm joining you all on Zoom today is so I could show you a little bit about what some of our priorities are at the legislature this year. So last year we worked with the Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds' office to make sure that we could secure funding for watershed coordinators and watershed management authorities. So before I kind of get into the nitty gritty of these details, I want to talk about those two things, watershed management authorities and watershed coordinators. Watershed Management Authority, WMA for short, you'll hear me use that term, is a voluntary intergovernmental partnership between cities, counties, and soil and water conservation districts, just those three. So they are locally directed partnerships organized on the boundaries of a watershed. So for example, I live just in the South Skunk River watershed, And there is a watershed management authority that's organized throughout the state, includes a number of different counties, soil and water conservation districts, and cities that all work together collaboratively to both improve water quality and reduce flooding risk in the watershed. So we work to support those. The Center for Rural Affairs values local control and local decision-making in all of our policy-making decisions. We believe that rural people should have a seat at the table. So we continue to advocate for this mechanism as a way to do that. Now, when we talk about watershed coordinators, we mean people who are leading the work of those WMAs. So we mean the folks that are talking with farmers and landowners about how they can get connected with cost share programs, whether it's a state program or a federal program through the USDA, ways that they can put practices on their land to both improve water quality and reduce flooding risks. Watershed coordinators are imperative to leading that work. And if we're to meet the goals that we have as a state, we have to invest in watershed coordinators as a way to do that. Those coordinators also have an important role in coordinating kind of the quarterly meetings and other happenings of the board of a watershed management authority, as well as bringing the public and other special interest groups into that process to make sure that all perspectives and voices are heard as the group works together on formulating a watershed management plan, which is just a clear roadmap for reducing flooding risk and improving water quality, and other activities like getting more resources into practices on the ground that improve watershed conditions. So that's the role of watershed coordinators in this process. Last year, we worked with the governor's office, as I mentioned, to include within her Invest in Iowa Act the Local Conservation Partnership Program. Essentially, the goal for that program was to get funding into the hands of watershed management authorities for the staffing of a coordinator. We want to make sure that these locally directed partnerships have the resources they need to secure more funding, whether that's grant funding from the federal level, get more practices on the ground, and have more projects going in across the state. We believe that with that state-supported leadership of those organizations, those structures of a WMA, we can get a lot greater success, more rapid success on improving water quality and reducing flooding in our communities. So that's our approach. Obviously, the governor has chosen not to reintroduce the Invest in Iowa Act this year, which means our local conservation partnership program, which we were very excited about, is not moving forward. So we had to reevaluate. What are we doing this year to keep in line with our approach, to align our values with those of our organization and the people we serve? And so what we've decided to do is put together what we're calling a water pilot program. So our water pilot program, WATER is actually an acronym, and it stands for Watershed Advancements That Enhance Resources. And I'm going to show you on my screen really quickly just what that looks like. So let me show you here. You should be able to see this now. This is our bill that we have put together, and we are currently showing to legislators about how do we establish a pilot program to prove that this concept works. We've seen it over and over and over again, but we want to show that putting state resources into coordinators leads to greater success for the state's water quality and flood mitigation goals. So essentially what this document shows is that we are proposing a 3-3-3 approach. Three-year projects granted to watershed management authorities to host a coordinator for a total of $300,000 apiece. So in all, it's about $900,000. It's less than $1 million. We can get the results that we would like to show legislators about this approach. We get the reductions in flood risk in our rural communities. We get improvements in water quality. All of these local leaders who are accountable to the voters of that watershed and represent them on that level, they can also look at other things, like how else do we leverage our rivers and our streams for outdoor recreation, like paddling and bike trails and all of these other things that bring economic investment into our rural communities. We know as rural Iowans that this is one of the best opportunities we have to build a strong and resilient local economy because we have great natural resources to share with the rest of the world. So this is what we are trying to do here on the water side. We are very excited to continue that conversation with state legislators and figure out how we can get this into the budget that's hopefully going to be passed within the next month or so. If you have questions about our water pilot program or about our watershed approach in general, I would love to connect with you. My email is codys@cfra.org. My colleague will post that contact information at some point in the comments here. So that's our approach on water this year. We're continuing the same value-based and evidence-based approach that we've shown over the last several years. So now let's talk about solar energy. And this is something that I believe is really important to discuss today because you have the opportunity to get very actively engaged and involved today. Actually, just after this Rural Rapport live stream is a subcommittee that is very relevant. But first, let me kind of take the big picture view. So many of us in rural America, farmers, small businesses, homeowners, take advantage of solar energy as a way to cut costs. There's a strong economic argument for adopting renewable solar energy into our portfolios. For a farmer, you can use it to operate your grain drying equipment and cut down your energy costs substantially during the years that you're harvesting and drying down corn for sale. You also might have a livestock confinement operation that operates heavy ventilation fans that require a lot of electricity. Solar energy, as we've seen with our pork producers across the state, is a great way to reduce costs in that manner. We also know that it makes small businesses more competitive. There are a number of resources for technical assistance and cost share that make it available and affordable for regular, everyday rural Iowans like us. And so that's what we're supporting in the Iowa Legislature. We have a state solar tax credit here in Iowa that is currently written to be 50% of the federal investment tax credit for solar. Looking at the language that way, it leaves us vulnerable to whatever happens in DC. It says here in Iowa, we're going to base our leadership on clean energy on the federal government's efforts with solar. If they decide not to act as they had previously until this last COVID relief package, we're not going to do anything. And so what we've been advocating for is a couple of things. We want to decouple the state solar tax credit from the federal one to attain and reaffirm Iowa's leader as a clean energy powerhouse in the nation. We've seen it with wind. We're trying to make sure that farmers and landowners have the opportunity with lease payments and other opportunities with solar energy to make sure that they have this as a viable option. So we want to decouple. That's the first thing. We also want to make sure that we have enough resources to meet the demand. In fact, over the last several years, the Iowa Solar Tax Credit was enacted in 2012. It has been oversubscribed, meaning that the demand has far outpaced the state's ability to provide that tax credit since 2015. It took 3 years to meet that limit. And it's because the state has put a $5 million cap on the total expenditure for the solar tax credit every year. What we're proposing, along with several of our partners at the Iowa Legislature, is to double that cap and move it from $5 million a year to $10 million to meet the demand that's already existing in the Iowa clean energy economy. So that's another component. So we've got decoupling, we've got expansion. Now let's talk about that oversubscribed phenomenon. So I mentioned since 2015 that the demand has outpaced the ability of the state to provide the tax credit. What does that mean? It means that across the state since 2015, farmers, small business owners, homeowners, commercial investors, whoever it may be that gets this tax credit, they have bought solar energy systems and they're waiting on their tax credit. It's so oversubscribed at this point that before the calendar year even began in 2020, 97% of those resources were oversubscribed, meaning basically the whole year's worth of tax credit, that $5 million cap, was gone before 2020 even got here. So that brings us to the third component that we've been asking for, and that's to allocate an additional $7 million to pay off that years-long waiting list of farmers, small business owners, others who have already invested in solar energy but are waiting to get their tax credit. So that's the third component. And another thing that we've been trying to do is provide certainty, which is the fourth component. And this will all kind of wrap up in a head in here in just a second. And that's to provide certainty. It comes with the decoupling, it comes with the expansion, it comes with paying down that wait list, but it also comes with having a time frame. We've suggested, along with partners again, that we set a December 30th, 2030 timeline for sunsetting this tax credit. We know that solar energy is the most affordable, one of the most affordable sources of electricity in the state and in the nation. We also know that we need to continue to support the industry as it grows and meets the climate challenges that we face as rural Iowans and as rural Americans. So that brings us back to the Iowa Legislature. Last week, Representative Jared Klein from Southeast Iowa introduced House File 221, and my colleague's going to post a link to that bill here in the comments. Essentially, that bill does all of the things I just described. So it decouples from the federal tax credit, instead sets the limit, instead of at 50% of the federal credit, makes it 15% of total project cost. We don't have to worry about what's going on in DC. Iowa is, again, providing certainty and a path forward for a clean energy future. That's the first thing. It expands the state's cap, the state mandated cap that currently sits at 5 million to 10 million, making sure that we have enough of those resources to support the demand that is there. In addition to that, it pays off that $7 million waiting list, a years-long waiting list of farmers, small business owners, and homeowners who have already invested in solar energy, but are waiting to receive their credit. And that's a one-time expenditure there. And then the fourth component is it sets that sunset for 2030 for the tax credit to expire. So that's what House File 221 does. And this is where it gets back to what I mentioned in the beginning. This is where we can use your help. This is about the future of Iowa's solar industry. And with your voice and your help and your support, we can make sure it's a bright future. We have the opportunity to tell our state legislators that this is something that we value as rural Iowans, our farmers, our small business owners. All of us in rural Iowa benefit from clean and renewable energy, and many of us, most of us, benefit from lower energy costs. Because when farmers and small businesses and homeowners have more money in their pockets, they have more money to invest in the economies in the communities that they live and work in. So we are going to continue to advocate for this. And this is where I wanted to talk specifically about how you can get involved today. So at 12:30 today, I know that's in about 14 minutes from now, the House subcommittee responsible for hearing the first hearing of this bill in the legislature is going to meet. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, you can't give video testimony or audio testimony at the Iowa House unless you're in person. So what does that leave us? You can follow the link here to submit comments. Can be, hey, I support this. I really encourage you to, pass this bill, to change this or change that. My colleague's going to post that here. You can submit comments that way. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Just tell them you support it. You can watch that subcommittee at a link that's going to be posted here. And that, again, is at 12:30. That link, you should be able to just open it up and be able to watch what the lawmakers are doing, hear the conversation, evaluate it, and then decide, is this something I want to call and ask my legislators to support? So this is something we are wanting to help you with too. The Iowa Legislative website has a link that is about finding your legislators. So you put in your address and it shows you, here's your state senator, here's your state representative, and here is their contact information. It includes their email, their cell phone, even tells you what their job is outside of the legislature, which I think is really helpful. So that Find Your Legislator link will be posted in the comments as well. This last tool is something we put together just for all of us, for supporters of rural Iowa who are excited and enthusiastic about solar energy. We have put together an advocacy tool where you put in your address just the same way, and you're presented with an email message that's already drafted, but is editable. You can customize it, you can make it your story, but it has those key points of the bill in there just to give you a head start on what to say to your state legislators. So if you'd like to advocate in support of this bill, you can follow the link. It says Every Action. That's the website, the advocacy tool that we use. My colleague will post that as well. And I encourage you, if you have any questions about the bill, the impacts of it, what solar energy means in rural Iowa, please reach out to us. I'm always available, again, via email. You can email me at CodyS, C-O-D-Y-S, at cfra.org. If you don't want to remember my email or my phone number, just find me on the cfra.org website and communicate with me that way. Again, thank you for your interest and your commitment to rural Iowa. We're really excited about the efforts at the Iowa Legislature this year, both in regard to watershed management and to solar energy. This is a time that's exciting. It's nice to see something moving forward that has such a bright and large outsized impact on the economies of rural Iowa. And so we're looking forward to it. We encourage you to get involved and be engaged. And again, thank you for tuning in today to the Rural Rapport series from the Center for Rural Affairs. We'll be back in your timeline next Tuesday at noon, same time as always. And we look forward to engaging with you there. Thank you very much.